Before leaving, please remember to make a contribution to all of my thousands of hours of work here, PayPal, Patreon, or fundraiser in the description below or on the China Rising Radio Sinoland article page. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, and I am very excited to go 10 time zones to the east into Asia, to the magnificent continent of Australia. And I've got on the show today, Chris McIlrath. How are you doing, sir?
Doing extremely well. This is evening here while it's morning for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not. I'm 9 in the morning, and you're 7 in the evening. So, how'd your show go last night?
Brilliantly, absolutely, perfectly. Even people who'd been vaxxed thought it was entertaining, which is a great success. And normal anti-vaxxers were thrilled to bits, and networking, and it really worked well. We're going to do another show. We've been asked when is the next show.
Well, that's always a good sign, isn't it?
Definitely. It's the first time the team had worked together, and it's really been brilliant. Everybody enjoyed it.
Did you act, or did you direct, or what was your role?
I was emceeing, and I introduced a couple of people, and I did the Q&A and a little talk before the Q&A, kind of summarizing things.
All right, cool. Well, listen, you don't have a lot of sunlight, so we better get started, all right? Let me tell you, this is Chris McIlrath. He is a director. He started his career in 1970 at Earwig Magazine in Auckland, New Zealand. Assistant editor. Are you Aussie or Kiwi?
I was actually born in England, but came to Australia when I was 8 3/4.
All right, gotcha. In 1985, he engaged to develop software for the film and TV industry, and subsequently feature film marketing. He re-released the Australian classic film Stone, S-T-O-N-E, in Cannes in 1988. He successfully negotiated sales in Europe, Asia, and South America with Los Angeles agents Trident Releasing. Of course, we see that all the time when you go to the movies. Later worked as video marketing consultant in Los Angeles, USA, and was secretary of Byron Bay Community FM Radio, engaged in obtaining broadcast license and an original station program host. He has produced and directed a number of TV commercials and documentaries. He later acquired the international rights to the documentary 9/11 in Plain Sight, Plane Sight, the director's cut, which was the top international film exploring the events of September 11, 2001. Chris has arranged the release and extensive screening of that documentary on TV and DVD internationally. Chris served as chairman of Link TV, the community television broadcast station in Lismore, Australia, and his documentaries he has produced and directed include An Hour with Stan Dio, next 2 hours with Bruce De Palma, next World War II German flying saucers, next the vaccination, the hidden truth, and untold story, next globalization, it's all about money, next I'm feeling seditious, we are today, and finally conflicting conspiracies, East Timor. And I will put on the webpage his website. He has a news called Znews, and he has a 50% interest in TVE, broadcast television in Timor-Leste, that's East Timor. And he is very open. I will put his phone numbers, website, email, WhatsApp, etc., so that you can contact him. So welcome to the show, Chris. Lovely to have you.
Brilliant to be here. Thank you so much. I should actually correct the TVE television thing in East Timor. That kind of fell apart because my business partner regarded it as evil to make a profit. So that was pretty difficult. So ended up not proceeding very far with that.
That's funny. All right. Well, listen, with all your work in media, I mean, you seem to have led an incredibly interesting life. Please just give us a rundown on your origins, growing up, and adult career.
Very, very briefly, well, I was born in England. My father was a psychiatrist who'd trained personally and qualified personally with Carl Jung.
Wow.
Jungian, yeah, personally with him. And then moved to Australia and was very, very successful here. I went to all the best schools in England and in Australia, Sydney Grammar School, which is the best school in Australia. And my last 2 years at school were at Canberra Grammar in Canberra, so I got to know a little bit of the government stuff there. We were within sort of stone's throw of Parliament House, which was quite interesting, and stone's throw of the Prime Minister's residence. So yeah, I've done all that. And what I also did in East Timor, I worked for DynCorp, which was totally fascinating because that's the company that supplies everything for the US military. And they asked me to quote on doing solar power and solar electricity and solar hot water and water purification, and told me that there wasn't anyone else going to bid on it. So I worked directly with the American military with that, which was extremely interesting.
Wow.
Although I hate them terribly much, but these guys are actually the construction battalion doing schools and clinics and stuff.
Interesting. Well, how did you get into media?
Oh boy, I had a friend who was an actor, a guy called Jack Thompson. In his day, he was Australia's most highly regarded actor, and we were quite close friends. And I kind of was at the edge of some of his films. He did one called Man from Snowy River, and I was on set there with him and Kirk Douglas. So I got to sort of see actors at work. Okay. And like that, and I got an opportunity to do a film with some German people, and they wanted to meet me at Cannes, at the Cannes Film Festival, where they were going anyway. And Jack Thompson, the actor, suggested I take something along to sell rather than just have a meeting there. So I took the film Stone, which was produced by a friend of mine. So I got the experience of selling a film as well as negotiating international stuff. And it was very, very, very interesting indeed.
So it was baptism by fire, right?
Absolutely. Very definitely. I did come out on top. I made a profit out of it all.
All right, good. Assuming you were educated and brought up like most of us, meaning brainwashed, how and when did you realize the truth about the West? Was it a slow arc of awareness, or did you have a sudden epiphany?
Well, I had kind of deep suspicions, it just didn't quite fit somehow. And then I was in New Zealand and working for a magazine called Earwig, which was part of the, just by chance, but it was part of the underground press syndicate, mostly in America, but also Europe and a little bit of Asia. So I got, what was really going on from people in Vietnam, in America. This is during the Vietnam War. And then the contrast of that and the mainstream media was just absolutely too much to ignore. So I became aware that, really what we're told generally is mostly nonsense, mostly just to manipulate our thoughts. It's not the truth at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You told me that you interviewed Andrei Vlecek. He's a mutual friend and comrade of ours. May he rest in peace. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. Please tell us about that.
Well, I saw an article of his somewhere, and I think it had an email, so I contacted him, and we got talking and recorded an interview when I was in East Timor, and he had been in East Timor during the Indonesian time, so we certainly had something to talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
Into every trouble spot in the world.
Yeah. Unbelievable. What was it like? Was it a audio interview, a video interview? How'd it go?
It was a video interview. I think it might have been on Skype, but unfortunately, somehow it degraded. Somehow I've had a lot of sort of technical difficulties with computers over the years, particularly in East Timor, and so I do not now still have that interview.
I'm sorry. All right. Well, listen, you have lived and worked in East Timor. What was the inspiration, and would you like to share with the fans out there what would you like to share with the fans out there about this relatively unknown, very tiny country?
Well, I had a girlfriend before I was married, and her previous fiance had worked in East Timor, and invited us to come to dinner with him and talk about it. That was the first I'd really heard of East Timor in any kind of direct sense. And so he told us the most terrifying story, that he'd been working there as a teacher while the Indonesians were there. And he went to his classroom one morning, and all of the school children were dead, either shot or some with their heads smashed with the rifle butts. So that was my introduction to East Timor. Wow.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then a friend of mine, a very, very fascinating fellow called Frank Courier, a barrister who actually had been my tutor at law when I studied law, he had been to East Timor with Jose Ramos Horta while the Indonesians were there. So he gave me a few clues as well. I'd had an interview with him. And then a friend of mine who was fairly wealthy was interested to know what was going on when they had what they call a crisis in 2006, when the army, the National Army, the National Police were shooting and killing each other in the main street of the biggest city, Dili. And so he was interested to know what was going on. I was interested to know what was going on. So he funded me to go over there, and I think it was May 2006, while there was still blood on the streets, and it was an amazing time to go there. It really was amazing. The Australian Army had been called in to help, and had taken the police and put them in their barracks and shut them into there, locked them in their barracks, taken the Army, the National Army, put them in their barracks and locked them in there. And so the Australian Army and Federal Police were running the country with, I think it was the executive power, oh no, that was after the UN had the UN had a big presence there, thousands of people. So it was a most fascinating time to be there, and through various contacts I ended up meeting all the main players. It was just astounding.
Amazing. Moving back to Australia, where you grew up, most people don't know about Gough Whitlam and his brief reign as Australia's Prime Minister. He was quite a man. Even fewer know he was deposed in a CIA MI6 financed and orchestrated coup d'etat.
Absolutely.
Please share this fascinating vignette into Down Under's post-war history.
Well, I was in a hardware store in Mullumbimby, the little town here, and they had like 25 televisions for sale, and on all of the televisions was the announcement that the Prime Minister had been sacked by the Governor General. And it was like, wow. A friend of mine who was in the store pointed me to the TVs. It was like truly astounding. I later found out a great deal more about it. I actually met personally with one of the CIA guys who had been employed to depose.
Wow.
He was in Los Angeles at the time and doing a tour about that. So that was quite an eye-opener. Oh, seriously, yes. And I later saw a bank account of the Governor General, I can't remember his name now, but of that guy, where he had money deposited in large amounts at precisely that time when he was deposing Whitlam, who was doing a great job. He was very brave. He didn't want to go into Vietnam, which was his criminal sin, according to the elite guys. So that's why they chucked him out.
And then also he was working with the Chinese, and he was buying, and he was trading with Vietnam and China, and refused to send soldiers there. And so that's just and to think that the United States, well, and England don't even hesitate to overthrow governments, and among their supposed allies. So
yeah,
and this may bring us to an appropriate question, and that how do you explain Australia's ability to shoot itself in the foot economically and pick the dark side geopolitically, going back to at least the Korean War, where they were, the Vietnam War after Gough Whitlam, and lately trying very hard to destroy all goodwill with his most important trading partner, China. It's just astounding.
Well, it's less astounding, and I'm sure you're sort of fully on top of this even more than I am. But when the big players want something to happen, then they just make it happen. They either bump off or displace the prime minister and own the media and just generally have their own agenda work, regardless of the well-being of the people in the country concerned.
Yeah, it's just incredible. It's just anyway. Now they're talking about putting. Well, they just signed the AUKUS, the Australian, UK, US nuclear submarine deal to challenge China and
I've got to tell you this, Jeff, if I may, that right now, as we speak, people from all over Australia are driving to Canberra to demand that all this nonsense stop.
yeah, I hope they succeed. They are succeeding in Canada, so let's hope. Let's hope. I think we're gonna talk about that in a couple more questions. But listen, I've never been to Australia. They, and unfortunately, with unless this COVID pandemic gets brought down, I may never get to travel there. And so, just because I am interested in China and the Chinese people and the Chinese diaspora, et cetera, I just wanted to ask you just a few things about, the Chinese, because I think there are quite a few of them in Australia. Are there any Chinatowns in Australia, like in the bigger cities, as we would know them?
All the big, it's certainly, very certainly in Sydney, there's a huge Chinatown there, and in Brisbane there's a big Chinatown. No, I haven't looked in Melbourne, but I bet there's one there as well.
All
so
right.
I think in all the big cities there's a major Chinatown. Yes.
What is the percent of the national population that are Chinese, of Chinese origin?
I couldn't guess, but if I were to guess, I'd say 5% maybe.
Okay, 5%. All right, all right. How are they treated on a daily basis, and is this changing with all this and with this xenophobic propaganda going on?
Now, the xenophobic propaganda doesn't have any impact on the man in the street. It's all just waffle and nonsense. People are totally accepted, whether Chinese or Indian or there's a huge array of different people from different countries in Australia, and they're all accepted.
Okay.
There's a tiny little fringe who are kind of don't like people who aren't white, but that's a very minute, irrelevant percentage.
I mean, has there been like a violent increase in crimes against them? Like in the United States, the number of violent crimes against Asians has gone up like 367%, in the last 12 months. No?
Definitely no.
Okay. Did Australia ever have openly racist anti-Chinese laws like America had from the 1870s to the 1950s, where they were literally, it was just like something out of, Nazi Germany,
Yes.
And did they have those laws in Australia?
No laws as such, but here's an interesting story for you. When I was at Sydney Grammar, they opened a huge science block, and the prime minister at the time was Menzies, who'd been like prime minister since the Second World War, more or less. This is in 1960, 61, something like that. And when he was I was there, obviously, and when he gave his speech, he said, look out for the yellow peril coming down from the north. That was the Prime Minister stating those words. That was the Prime Minister's statement.
Oh my gosh.
And we did have a kind of a white Australia policy, but it was just it was allowing people who had skills and restricting people who had no skills, kind of thing. But there are tremendous quantities of Italians and Greeks and all people from Europe coming into Australia at that time.
Okay, interesting. So were there any mass killings and genocide against the Chinese like happened in the United States? I mean, tens of thousands were exterminated in the United States back in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Did that happen in Australia?
Not as far as I know, although there was a gold rush here around that time, and there may have been a bit of that going on. I really don't know. There was one incident
Okay.
locally here about, I don't know, 60 years ago, something like that, where there was some Chinese people living in a rural house, and they were wiped out by people. I think that was 60 or 70 years ago. But
Okay.
virtually not at all. But, tiny
All right.
incidents, as far as I know.
Well, pick two or three of your favorite documentaries and what you liked about them, and looking back, what you might change today.
Well. I really liked 9/11 in Plain Sight, of which I was a distributor. That was tremendous. I don't know if you've seen that film or any others about 9/11, but there was a lot of hard evidence of how the Americans had actually done it to themselves. And when it
Oh
was
yeah.
screened on, the national television network here, Network 10, I personally got hundreds of phone calls. And when the channel themselves got calls, they only sort of sent them over to me when they were sort of overflowing. There was about 700 calls during the screening, of which 6 were saying, how awful to show such a terribly naughty film, insulting our American cousins. But the more than 99% of the 99% of the people who saw the film recognized that America had done it to itself from the evidence in the film.
Oh, absolutely. What about another one of your films?
Oh boy. Well, I did Vaccination: The Hidden Truth. That was about 20 years ago, and I really didn't
Okay.
have an
Wow.
opinion. I didn't have an opinion about it, but I was asked to do a documentary on it. I was paid to do a documentary, so I was doing interviews with doctors and patients and such things. And at the end of it, I realized that there's no benefit ever been shown, or not for the last 100 years been shown, in vaccination, but tremendous quantities of damage to the people who have been
Yeah.
vaccinated.
Yeah. Well, that's heretical in global capitalism, with big pharma, raking in billions and billions of dollars a year. You're very courageous, just like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's been practically blackballed from the media and is called a heretic for discussing scientifically vaccines. Well, it seems like France and Australia are in competition to be the most Orwellian dystopia. But with concentration camps, and from what I've seen outside of the big lie propaganda machine, what I call the BLPM, it looks like Down Under is in the lead, even over France. Although I can also bring up Austria, which is now are now giving fines to people who are not vaccinated. Please share with us your experiences. I understand Australia is similar to Canada, the US, and Switzerland, where individual states can have different sets of laws. And how is COVID different across the country? I've heard Melbourne is the most fascist of them all. Just tell us what's going on, and then we'll talk about the good news about the incredible resistance going on. But tell us about the bad part first.
Well, Victoria, definitely the worst. There've been, you must perhaps have seen, but there's lots of scenes of like police throwing people onto the road, onto concrete. Old people, children, women, just literally throwing them onto the concrete so they hit their head and seriously damaged. And this is just complete insanity. But that has been happening. I've been trying to get back to East Timor, where I have a family, and I've just found out that Northern Territory will not allow anyone to go into the Northern Territory who's not been vaccinated. And I know they've been chasing people around, chasing particularly the Aborigines, and forcing them to be vaccinated.
Yeah, I know.
So there's a lot of terrible stuff going on. But I must say that the people in the street, I talk to at least 20 people every day, and the majority of them know that it's awful, terrible, and just a pack of lies.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And then I've seen films of concentration camps, I think up near Darwin or out in the middle of the boondocks, where they're segregate. If you test positive for COVID, and of course we know the tests are totally worthless anyway, the PCR tests. But if they get diagnosed with being infected, they're taken off to concentration camps for 2 weeks, and it's just unbelievable. Well, tell us about the good news. I understand all hell is breaking loose in Australia, like in Canada, and I know it's starting in New Zealand, and Europe is supposed to have a big truck convoy bearing down on Brussels on the 14th of February. But from our email contacts over the last few weeks, it sounds like Australians are really starting to fight back against all this COVID totalitarianism. Tell us about that, and give us some hope, Chris.
Oh, there's big hope. Huge crowds have been gathering. I've been 2 or 3 times, I think 3 times, to the border between New South Wales and Queensland, quite illegally been blocked off. 100 years ago, 1901, I think, when there was federation, it was in the constitution that the borders would be open, and they've been closed. So there's been huge protests, 5, 10, 15,000 people at these protests, very eloquent people speaking, and very enthusiastic crowds from both sides of the fence. And with a bit of hopefulness, the police who've been supervising it had been briefed very politely by the organisers, and so the police are actually quite decent and quite friendly, and not a problem at all on the border between New South Wales and Queensland. But I've been to several groups within 100 miles of here, and there's lots of people, farmers and people who don't normally object to anything. They are rising up and objecting and travelling to Canberra. There's been several convoys that have been a bit organised, and then there's a whole lot of people individually going down there, so that the masses have been woken up. They recognise that all this is just complete madness.
Yeah, totally. So what do you see as the prognosis for Down Under in the next year? I mean, how do you see this all shaking out?
Well, I think in the next month the Parliament will fall. That's my prediction. I may be a bit optimistic, but I was at a crowd in Ballina, which is a tiny coastal town of no consequence at all, at least to people who don't live there. But I was there, and there was a crowd of 5,000 people, and the MC asked the crowd, I was there, physically there, people, please hold up your hand if you know anyone well who has been either killed or damaged by the vaccine. Immediately, about, I reckon, at least 4,000 out of 5,000 people put up their hand. That was mind-blowing. That's amazing.
Unbelievable. New Zealand and the UK have come up with a police report, a place where you can a criminal investigation into COVID damage and death. And anybody in England and anybody in New Zealand can file complaints well, in England you have to go to the Metropolitan Police Station, but in New Zealand you can file your complaint online. And apparently a lot of people are. Is that possible in Australia, or is it because of the division of the states, is that not possible?
They do have a thing, I think it's called the TGA, anyway, a government group that is supposedly supervising what is an approved drug, and they do have a facility to report, and there are a lot of reports there, although obviously under-reporting as in all the other reporting, but there's a great deal of injuries, and that is actually getting some traction.
Okay, all right, good. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed that you'll be able to come here to Normandy and enjoy our wonderful cheese and Norman cooking, and I'll be able to fly to Australia and visit you and eat your wonderful macadamias. Those trees behind you is Chris's 3,000 macadamia tree farm, and so I would love to see that.
Yeah, and it's all organic, so you'll definitely love it.
What plans do you currently have in the pipeline? Creative, political, otherwise? I know you're doing this play, this play about that you put on last night about COVID. Tell us what do you have in the pipeline?
We're going to do a second one, which will be more hard hitting. We were pretty soft with this one. It was a comedy, but we'll do a little bit more hard hitting. We are going to edit and put what we did last night online. That should take a week or so to edit. I've got some very, very good team members who are doing that right now. We're also going to do a feature film, which will be a kind of after it's all over. That'll be the kind of the fictional part of where we'll be when it's over, even though we're going to publish the film while it's still going on. But we'll have our kind of solutions to the current problem and what the outcome will be, and it'll be a kind of a happy ending there.
Good.
So we've got two or three different things going on. We also may very well publish our own newspaper, get our own radio station, have our own a TV station, because the local stuff is just polluted. We've got a supposedly independent newspaper, which seems to have been taken over by the pharmaceutical companies. Same with the supposedly independent radio stations. So a lot of people want to have our own broadcasting, which is starting to happen.
It's the business model for big pharma is wonderful. Create drugs that make you sick. Or create vaccines that make you sick, so that you need to buy more drugs to get well, and then you get sick. I have a Chinese friend who lives in Sydney, and his mother lives in Singapore, and he was begging her, do not get the Western vaccines. Do not get the Western vaccines. And she got I think it was either Pfizer or Moderna, and she immediately had, blood clotting, and she may have even had a stroke. Anyway, now thanks to that, she now has to take a blood thinning medication the rest of her life. And guess who makes the blood thinner medication?
Pfizer, or the same.
Pfizer. So now Pfizer has a new client for the rest of her life, because she took a Pfizer vaccine that gave her the disease that she now has.
The sound has just gone off somehow.
So anyway, Chris, this has been a great show. We have both been struggling with internet. You're walking around your macadamia farm, and the internet connection here in France is antediluvian, even though we supposedly have fiber. High-speed internet is absolute garbage compared to China or Thailand, where we lived before. So anyway, thank you so much for being on the show. And it's just been great to be a friend from long distance.
Thank you so much. But let me end, if I may, with a couple of high notes, and that is that I have spoken personally to quite a lot of police and quarantine people when I came in from Timor, and at least half of them, I said, this is all nonsense, and they say, yeah, we know, but we're being paid to follow procedures. So there's a lot of people inside the institutions, inside the machinery, who know it's nonsense. I also talked to a nurse in Adelaide, a lady named Sally, and she said in the hospitals there are an enormous number of people damaged from vaccines, and a huge number of nurses, including her, who would not take the vaccine because they see the damage that it's doing. And if I can just say one more tiny thing about Timor, that they got their independence eventually after they got independence from Portugal when there was a coup in Portugal created by 20 of the officers inside the military dictatorship of Salazar. So the officers inside the military had a coup and then put it out for democratic election. So there's hope. There is definitely hope.
Well, and I just saw a video of truckers in Ottawa who are saying that police, the Metropolitan Police in Ottawa, half of them have resigned, and the other half are not enforcing any of the propaganda edicts, about doing this and stopping this and everything. So apparently the our global capitalist trillionaire dictatorship has in the West has overshot their ambitions, and hopefully this will bring in a new era of win-win cooperation and a multipolar world. So let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's going to be much better. Thank you very much, Jeff.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. We'll stay in touch. Talk to you later.
Bye for now.
China Rising Radio Sinoland and China Tech News Flash signing out. Please make a contribution to all of my hard work. Thank you.